Hello valued viewers, I hope you're all doing very well and welcome back. Today we're doing something a bit different just because it's interesting and you know us, we just like to talk about stuff that we're interested in. We've got hold of a very nice chap called Tom Alfaro. Now before I introduce Tom and talk to Tom, I thought it'd be interesting to show the process of how we found him, because that in itself is a little bit interesting as well. So what I'm going to start reading out is an email chain I have between one of you guys, the valued viewers. Cap, I believe you might be interested in reviewing the conceptual model of Lockheed Martin's F-45 6th generation fighter, since it's a hybrid of the F-22, F-35 and YF-23. It has the best features of any advanced tactical fighter I have ever seen. For your convenience, I've included a YouTube link. That's how I first saw this design. We'll talk about Tom's design. I said, "Hi, thanks. Is this a real thing or just science fiction?" He comes back with saying, "Both is just a concept model being considered for a prototype. It would also have been a great aircraft for DCS, which would fulfill my hopes of flying the YF-23, the F-22 and the F-35 all in one airframe. So your potential review would be based on the theme, what if the Americans built an advanced tactical combat fighter with both horizontal and vertical takeoff capabilities and stealth capabilities, the ability to land on modern airfield or aircraft carrier." He goes on, "Cap, the YouTube link and images I sent you earlier were designed and created by Tom Alfaro, a retired major in USAF. He explains that he has driven, fixed, flown and navigated many kinds of real vehicles on the sea and air." I'll terminate there. That's what I first found, and I watched this YouTube video of this. It's called the Killswitch, and we'll talk about what that is in a minute. But it was a typical kind of internet clickbait where someone had put it up and pretended it was the brand new 6th gen USAF fighter, which of course it's not. But then from that, I wanted to do a video like this talking about it. So to do that, I had to find out what this was. I had to found this website, Panspatial, found this Killswitch concept. From that, I managed to get Tom's email, contact Tom, and luckily he was a really nice guy. And here we are. He said, yes, I'm willing to come on and talk about it, which brings me on to Tom. Hello, Tom.
Hi, Cap. Thank you. It's interesting to get that feedback on how people find out about this stuff.
Just so people know roughly who you are, can we have a quick description of who you are and your background, please?
My background is a combination of military and design related. And by way of time frame, yeah, I have served in 3 branches of the U.S. military. I started out, I was enlisted helicopter technician and air crewman for about 6 years through university. When I graduated from that, I went off to Navy flight school and became an EA-6B ECMO for a short amount of time. And this is all active duty. And then I deployed with the Enterprise for a couple years. And then I got in the Tomahawk business, TLAM. And then after active duty Navy, I joined the Air Force Reserve, where I finished off supporting a number of different things in kind of the intelligence field, but more in requirements and acquisition more than anything. And then because I moved around so much, yes, I did spend 30 years in the military. And I wound up, I didn't get very far from a rank standpoint, but Major Tom is a pretty good brand, so I was happy to retire on that note. So in the meantime, when I left active duty Navy, understand my undergraduate degree is in industrial design, and I also have a master's degree in operations research and analysis. So in the, about the 2008-2009 timeframe, I started getting into the business of concept design, supporting concept design for commercial endeavors and also military as well. And that really was a good combination of my educational background, my design skills, but certainly also my military experience and desire to help bring ideas forward. So I've been doing that for several years, sometimes more successfully than not. And right now you've caught me on an upswing. So, that's a nutshell, details to follow.
What is Panspatial, by the way? Is that your company or is that something else?
Yeah, that's my brand and it's my company. I've done more work with it in the past. I let it go cold here for the last few years while I've been doing a lot more working specifically for aerospace companies, and I didn't really need to be doing it. But I did recently reincorporate in California, and I've got a few clients going. So yeah, Panspatial is what I am doing full time independently now.
Is this public, by the way? Can I link this in the video description for people to look at?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Great. Okay, so in there are just 3 designs that you've done. We've got Dragon Wing, we've got Fade On here, and we've got Killswitch. And Killswitch is the one that was originally kind of mislinked to us and how we found you. Interesting concept of a very futuristic, stealth-based fighter with various features. Where do you want to start on this?
If you start on the lower left-hand side where the aircraft is sitting there at dawn, from a production standpoint, and I'm kind of skipping ahead here, this was, and I'm talking about just production and publication, and I'll get into the background of the model for a minute. But as you can imagine, this is kind of a time-consuming process. So what I did is, of course, I designed and built the model. Get more into that in a minute. But then I would create one series of renders. Spend better part of a week developing getting those renders in, and I was working and doing other work at the same time, and pushing them out there while I work on the next batch, and then the next batch, and then the next batch. So this is kind of the intro to the universe of the Killswitch plane. So the intent of the airplane, and it's totally unscripted here, but the intent was for me to go get more work. That was the point. Was that I had been doing a lot of work as an innovation consultant in things that didn't have anything to do with aerospace, in healthcare and immigration and veterans benefits and things like that. And it was a great, professionally, it was very rewarding because I really understood process a lot more. But after having done that for a few years, I realized, I've got to get back to spaceships and airplanes. I've got to get back to that field. And you're certainly welcome to go look at my LinkedIn profile if you want to understand a little bit more about that. But I won't get into, I won't go through my resume at this point. Anyways, so this is basically a portfolio piece, portfolio/resume for me to demonstrate some skill sets, both the creative ability as well as the technical knowledge of aircraft, to go out and get more work. And it did work. So that was the origin of the airplane. That was the purpose of doing it. Now, my criteria going into it is that I have to stick, and I'll say 2 things that are, the one's important and one's fun. The 2 things are, 1, I do have to be very careful to avoid, real things,
right,
like trying to express either too much of what I do or don't know about real technology, and I don't want to be the occupational hazard there is guessing correctly. That's a big no-no as well. So that's kind of the downside, right? But it's all, I'm an industrial designer, so it's all just design criteria. But then the second part of that is the fun part, and that is that there is a lot that we can explore with publicly available information, and there is a lot that we can accomplish with just straight geometry. It's this shape. It fits here. It weighs this much. You can't have stuff bumping into each other. This isn't a Transformer movie where you can magically have, mass appearing where you want it or not. I mean, you certainly can in CGI, but I elect not to do that. So anyways, those are kind of the 3 parts of the origin of it. 1, it was a portfolio resume piece. 2, need to be very careful to avoid new things or what I imagine might actually be new things. But the third part is, there is a lot that we can explore with just straight geometry. And quite frankly, the real world of aircraft design and development is like that as well. There's a lot. I mean, the people who are really advancing and really innovating, if you ask me, mainly on the commercial side, a lot of it has less to do with the 6th decimal and splitting the hair of the deck-defined emulator phenomena or whatever. And it has more to do with just straight up configuration management and forgive me, but actual design as opposed to engineering things. So anyways, so I've said that,
Roger.
Those are kind of the three points of origin for me.
Can I just pick you up on one thing there? It looks like you've actually designed it like a real plane. So what you said there is, if you look at Optimus Prime, his bits just come out of nowhere. It's all just magic. Nothing is actually planned. Whereas this, you can actually go in, and we'll see in a bit, they've got cutaways where Tom's planned where all the surfaces go, how they work together. Obviously not to a manufacturing degree, but to a design degree. Everything theoretically should work. And that's what's a really interesting thing about it.
So in terms of physical features and explaining it, now it's, all that grown-up stuff out of the way. So from a technical standpoint, the main biggest aspect of the airplane is that the is it has to do with the split fuselage, and that you can have this, I believe you have this forward swept wing that integrates with a canard thing in the front, and the idea is by achieving this macro variable geometry in the center of the aircraft, you have the opportunity for achieving a configuration that is more stealthy and better for high-speed cruise. And yet at the same time, when you change the aircraft, when you go through the variable geometry, now you have an aircraft that is maybe less stealthy, but certainly a lot more maneuverable. And it is variable geometry, but on a much more fundamental level than, say,
swing wing or something.
than just swing wings, for example, or just something like that. It was like, okay, that's the idea. It's like if we achieve kind of but on the other hand, it's not like I have a bunch of stuff popping out. It's not Knight Rider where I've got like fins and crap popping out all over the place. It's like, it's a big airplane. Can we just do can we just do one motion, just one sliding motion, and get a lot done with just that? And that had actually been in my head in various versions for many years, pieces of it. But that's kind of the fundamental thing of the thing, in that, you've got the split that happens in the middle. It has a profound impact on the wings. It has a profound impact on your inlets. And it has a significant impact, less so on your aspect ratio.
Roger.
And then in addition to that, that's kind of the biggest thing. And then the next things downstream of that are interesting, important, are, of course, the kinetic capacitor in the middle, the vertical takeoff and landing, the giant rotor up front that takes care of that, and, of course, the tails on the back, which serve multiple functions as well.
One thing, Tom, is it's very easy to look at this design and say, oh, it's not possible. There's too many moving parts. You can never do anything like this. But if you just look back in history, most of this has actually been done. The fan, the F-35 Bravo, obviously you've got the fan there. It works. The whole body shape of a plane moving, it's been done. I can't remember the plane now. Was it what was it? The Corsair? There was a plane where you could change the whole angle of incidence of the wing, an old 50s US naval plane.
That was the F-8 Crusader.
This has all been done, this happens. This is real stuff that's been done before. So there's nothing really so far that I've seen that's technically, it is a bit far-fetched, but not, spaceship far-fetched.
There's a couple guiding principles there, and we'd have to go back to Sid Mead. Of course, you guys are familiar with Sid Mead, Blade Runner 2010, and just a very famous and well-known industrial concept design guy. And he's probably not the first person to say this, but when it comes to concept design, it's important that you give people enough elements that they recognize, that they can identify with it. You don't want to, and that can be color or texture or paint or glass or, things that, edges of an airplane, things that, airfoils, things that people are generally familiar with. Those need to be part of your painting or your drawing or your rendering, in his case, so that people can identify with the new stuff that you understand. Yeah. And the funny thing is, that's something I read back when I was in middle school from him. But it's funny that I think you see the same statement is applicable to, say, the fashion industry. And I 100% believe that it's also part of the armaments industry, if you will, when it comes to innovation and new things. People that are signing the checkbooks want something that's fairly familiar, has a lot of familiar elements to it, and yet there's a portion of it that is really innovative and something that they haven't thought of before.
Remember when the JSF project was developing and you had the two contenders, what is now the F-35 and the other one, the kind of the goblin looking one?
The X-32.
Roger, and obviously F-35 won, and part of that to me, always seemed like they did that in a way because it was easier to sell to the public, because they knew what the F-35 looked like. It looked a bit like the Raptor. It's, they understand what it is, whereas the X-32 was completely new and scary, and no one likes scary, right?
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't the reason why that happened was actually kind of the opposite. I mean, your perception of how people reacted to it is correct, but the origin is actually a little backwards and perfectly publicly available. But the F-32 was in fact based on more of a engine configuration that you have in the Harrier, where you have a single high bypass turbofan, and it has four different thrusters that are coming out of it, and basically they took that kind of engine and were trying to stick it in a newer stealth jet. So the X-32 was supposed to be the low risk approach. From a propulsion standpoint, it was the low risk standpoint, but ultimately, it turned out the overall configuration introduced more risks than the F-35 configuration, which, by the way, and again, publicly available information. If you guys some of you, I'm sure, in your group have done the research and understand that basic configuration matured very early on, actually, in the Soviet Union and not the U.S.
Absolutely.
So what you've got up here is the quote unquote kinetic capacitor, and the who knows what the origin of this idea. I just but what, like, how I thought of this, I can't tell you exactly how, but I can tell you that the purpose was anytime you have a feature in a real system. Okay, this applies to real stuff. You want to be killing more, several birds with one stone. You don't want to commit real estate or weight and mass and drag in an airplane without having it do a couple things for you. What's basically happening here is when you think about the F-35 and you've got the F-35B with the lift fan in the front. The lift fan is not doing anything while you're in flight. It's not contributing to lift control, its controllability or efficiency. It's not contributing to your lethality of the airplane, and it's certainly not contributing to the stealth. So if you have to haul something like that around, what else could you be doing it? And in this case, there's, again, publicly available information. You can see it. There has been some discussion about, well, you could potentially be powering a directed energy weapon for whatever, either just for a variety of purposes, which is true. But that's a good place to start. But then I had given it some more thought in terms of how you could power something like that. And so this isn't a linear equation. It's not a linear problem-solving adventure that I went on here. There's some aspects of it, and I'll come back to this in a minute. There are some aspects of it that do apply to real design. But pausing that for a second. So how this damn thing works is does have a lift fan in there, and how that lift fan is powered is both a combination of the direct power coming from the engines, which is limited somewhat. You're only going to get so much electrical power. If you have something like what I'm postulating here is, in addition to just the normal transmission of electricity and how you would amplify that, using something like a kinetic capacitor, where you actually have essentially a flywheel in there that you could use to get the power to a different state anyways. And then in addition to that, with the design of the fan, like I mentioned, I have some experience with turbine engines and how they function. And my theory for a while was that you could, it's one thing to have a direct lift fan that's just axial, that takes air from the top of the airplane and blows it out the bottom. But if you have something more like a centripetal impeller, where you're basically kicking the air out to the side, then you have the opportunity to do something a little differently with it, like point it to the left and right of the aircraft, so you can provide not only the lift but some measure of control as well. It can go around a payload bay or something like that. And in this case, they're mutually beneficial in that the fan itself, if say you're in flight, say you're using this kinetic capacitor for your directed energy weapons, the lift fan would also be utilized as a cooling component of the directed energy thingamabob. So it's a bit of Rube Goldberg, and I'll say about this and a lot of other components, two things, and they are, in many cases, with the geometry, and that's mainly the realm that I work in many cases, they may be causing more problems than they're actually solving. However, as a design exercise, it demonstrates that there are other approaches to solving problems, and they demonstrate potential creative solutions, maybe not the whole damn thing. If I've got 6 or 7 things that are integrated and doing different functions, if maybe you just take one, or maybe you just take 2, you realize that, oh, this is something that could be implemented on a real system and a real aircraft and result in efficiency or effectiveness. Yeah, there's a little bit more of a description.
So,
and
is this? So you said this is powering the quote unquote laser? Is that right at the front?
Well, let's just say directed energy, because the directed energy could be used for detection, for guidance, for targeting, for lethal effects. Take your pick, and I'm not going to get into it too much, but the idea is that whatever you need a lot of electricity or energy and point it towards, but at the same time, we have an opportunity to explore that. And okay, so it's one thing to have this device, and they're getting smaller and smaller and smaller to where you can put it in a combat aircraft. But here's a design challenge. Where are you going to integrate that on the airplane? What does the guidance thing look like? What does your turret look like? Is it you see Popular Mechanics not too long ago has an F-16 with a big belly pod on it, and it's okay. That looks like a high drag approach that and how there's limitations to that. It's an F-16, I recognize it, but that's going to be a high drag pod, and how much electricity is your GE engine really going to be providing to that? And yeah, it's got an eyeball gimbal mount, but it doesn't matter because you're not going to be able to point it upwards without sawing your airplane in half. So even you look at publicly available sources, you immediately identify these limitations to even installing something like that. And so then for me, the thrill becomes, okay, how would you integrate such a turret on an airplane in a way that you're going to get the most out of it? And I had experimented with a lot of different configurations that were kind of on the wings. Some were multi-aperture, and the wing root was one I stuck with for a long time. It was kind of this wing root with these fixed apertures, and something like that might work. But I was romantically enamored with how can I put it on the front of the plane? From an effective standpoint, it's I know that you would have the biggest field of view, you could do the most with it, but how can I do it without making it look stupid? And I honestly don't think it's 100% there yet, but it was just the opportunity to struggle with, how do I make it so it doesn't look stupid, so it can rotate around and it doesn't look like it's going to totally upset the airplane. The optical element is modeled after a lightning pod, the laser designator, because I felt like that's kind of the best combination of aerodynamic and something that could potentially be stealthy, but I struggled with that for a long time. Stay on this fuel.
I'm going to talk about it. Yep.
So enough about the gazer beam.
So my question would be in how much detail did you design this to factoring in center of gravity and stuff like that, or is it just a hodgepodge and you just stuck anything anywhere?
No. I for any elements that I'm selecting, I'm going to do my best job of doing some center of gravity and mass management that I can, to a point. There's a point where I got to throw in the towel too. And on that point, I will say that on this design, the two biggest, and there are plenty, the two biggest compromises that I made are, one, the weight of all these mechanisms and stuff. I have a feeling it's really probably going to outweigh the utility, but I'm aware of it, and I'm aware of the opportunities to improve it. And then the other thing is fuel capacity. And that's one thing where I'm like, no way. I don't have, I've got like, I only have room for like maybe 60% of the fuel I think I would really need. But damn it, I'm going to figure out where that would go and the best job I can do that would facilitate some level of center of gravity management on the fuel usage. So yeah, when I'm going to lose a battle, when I got to take a defensive position on something, I'm pretty well aware of it. And yeah, the fuel capacity is one of them. It's one of the, but it's nice that it's a liquid. As opposed to, cryogenic or something like that. It's pretty fungible. I hate to admit that it becomes my punching bag in terms of where I can, where I can soak up stuff.
You've had experience of the process before. If we were 25, 30 years ago, whatever, and this was actually the Raptor, and this was the first initial kind of concept, everything sort of roughly goes about here. What happens at that point? Is that handed over to the engineers at that point, and they say, none of this works, you've got to move this over here, you've got to move this over here? How does the process even start?
It does start out with concept, meaning they have both, if you could picture kind of a graph in front of you off to the left, there's a lot of technical opportunities, there's new phenomenon, there's new devices, there's new materials, but over on the right, you've got requirements and you've got, missions that the military knows they want to do and they can't quite do yet. And so you've got to meet in the middle. And the design process of a real aircraft is iterative. And of course, certainly, starting from the left, it's a little more theoretical and the timeline goes by, it becomes a little more concrete. But yeah, it's a very creative and volatile and emotional, as it should be, process early on in aircraft design. And some people find it very frustrating. Some people think it's exhilarating, but yeah, there's bizarre things in place, and they kind of narrow it down as they go along. At the same time, though, there are times when you do get at a loggerhead, like where the design is becoming more mature. You've got a specific engine, you've got a specific system, you've got a specific hydraulic pump, you got a specific stress requirement, and they don't seem to be matching up. And this is part of an engineering process, right? And there seems to be no way out. I just call it the paper bag. There seems to be no way out. And that requires, again, a great deal of creativity and throwing things up on the wall to solve the problem. And it's really funny because there's very few engineers consider themselves to be quote unquote creative people, and yet they consider themselves to be problem solvers. Like, well, you actually are using a creative process, but the desire to repress it and not call it that sometimes limits their ability to arrive at a brilliant solution. So fortunately, the older I get and a little more skilled and matured, I've been able to be part of those teams and provide some more design process to get technical problems over the hump. And I'm able to do that because of the different things I've done over the years, but just the design exercise of something like the Killswitch or the Dragon Wing. Yeah, we're not going to go out and build it and fly it tomorrow, but the experience I gained working through those design problems is the same experience that I'm able to apply to helping develop real aircraft.
To pick an abstract from that, in a way, what you described was a list of requirements and then a list of actual facts about the aircraft, and you said you kind of meet in the middle and get a compromise. Would it be fair to say that most of all aircraft are really just a mush of compromises, because you can't have everything, you can't do everything?
Yeah, 100%. The tendency is to look at it and say, oh, this is, I'll take you a step further here. It's like, okay, this is math driven and equation driven, and we worked really hard, and this is the most perfect solution. Oh man, absolutely not. It's and this is going to be a little my personal philosophy, and I'm going to quote somebody famous, but it's, and this is not something I knew when I was 20 or 30 or in my 40s. Sorry to date myself, but all of life is art and drama. And what I mean by that is it's a matter of self-expression and how people respond to that expression, love, hate, anger, joy, satisfaction, whatever. So, and I'll throw in a quote here. This is something I read just last night, and it was a quote from Admiral Rickover, who was the famous like father of the nuclear engineering program in the Navy through the 50s and 60s. And he said that, one problem we face is that engineers get into this mindset that there is a perfect answer and that there is only one way to do things. And it makes it very difficult for them to make decisions about their work and move through a problem quickly. And so he said you need to keep in mind that all of your solutions are going to be imperfect. And it's not his exact quote, right? And I would take that a step further with a bit of knowledge that I have, and that is that in terms of like solving problems and getting to a perfect solution, and that is the minute you complete a project, like say a cool hypothetical concept airplane, in that same very minute, you're capable of doing something that's twice as good or twice as awesome.
Very good. I'm glad to see it's got a gun, Tom.
Yeah.
You've learned that lesson. You've kept that lesson. That's nice.
Yeah. There's a lot of uses for a gun. Just a lot.
Mm-hmm. Even in our simulations, not imperfect as they are, even with 5th gen on 5th gen, the amount of times that we go back to gun. And yeah. This is interesting. This cell in the middle that carries this kind of vertical, not quite vertical, but nearly vertical launch missiles that can go above the aircraft. What's that all about?
What this is about, it's about making the best use of volume in an aircraft, meaning taking a look at the internal. And this is an exercise of something that can be solved. How can we use geometry to solve this a little better? And when you look at the F-22 and the YF-23 and their internal weapons carriage systems, there's some huge compromises there that impact the aircraft significantly. Now, of course, the fact that you can have an aircraft like the F-22 that even has internal weapons and yet is able, have significant performance and pretty decent range, things like that, is like, wait a minute. Where do you guys get the room to do all that? like 20 years ago, all that room was taken up by gas and other stuff. So how in the hell did you find room to put those missiles? And so they've done it. And I've got some idea of how they've done it. It has to do with density of your systems and everything. So they've done a pretty good job with it. Yet at the same time, there's a lot of compromises. Like, when you think about when they have to launch an AMRAAM, for example, you have to open this huge section of your airplane. And, the man on the street, we kind of take it for granted. It's like, well, no kidding. If you want to launch a missile, you got to open the door. It's like, but do you? Like, there's other systems like your 70 millimeter rockets that they shoot off helicopters. You don't have to open a big giant door to get that done. So this is me taking a look at that and going, okay, so how do you, and of course, another big challenge to AMRAAMs and weapons bays are you got those fins, right?
And it says wasted space. Right, there's wasted space.
Yeah, exactly. Now the fins are 2-dimensional; they're not 3-dimensional largely. So it's like, you can do something, and they have, but still, it's a damn fin. And okay, so I don't want to have this barn door opening when I'm flying along at Mach 2+, and I don't want to be wasting all this volume on fins. So with those two design criteria, those are the two main ones. Where do I go? Where do I go from there? And so I did. This is like generation 3 for me. I had a couple generations that were like a rotary launcher and these other kinds of openings and some other stuff, which I still am in love with and could be a cool installation on something. But ultimately, I arrived at this sort of submarine launched version, and then took it a little farther, and that was the idea that it's possible, like for example, if the aircraft was in a turning fight or had some G on the airplane for whatever reason, if you're behind another aircraft or something, you would certainly have a geometrically advantageous missile from the get-go. I mean, in this one, I have it flying out the front, but the idea is you can imagine yourself in, one circle fight and you touch off a missile, and I know that obviously missiles, they can handle like, 20 Gs, but give me a little more. Let's shoot it out the top. Yep. And then, of course, the other advantage being that if the aircraft is flying really fast, you don't have a big giant door to open up. You can drop the missile out the back and it can deploy that way. So this little shot locker thing was, this took a long time to figure out, and to be happy with it. But again, it's an exercise. It's not like advanced optics or hypersonic this or whatever. It's like, no, it's just straight up geometry. Put it in a different part of the airplane, have a geometry of the missile that lends itself to more dense packaging and smaller doors and things like that. It's straight up just an exercise in geometry.
And did that turn out to be the most efficient way of stacking the missiles, to have them in a triangle shape with folding fins?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. It's either that or a square. I mean, circles are good, of course, if you're deriving strength from the volume. That's if you're doing something else in the volume that's between the circles. Yeah. Then okay, maybe that's more efficient. But what the triangle enabled me to do was, and you can see it in some of the other images, if you have like the large missile, that's one triangle. Yeah, this. Okay, so the top left corner of this image, you can see where
look at that.
In one of the shot lockers, you can have either one twister, which is the longer range, more capable missile, or you can have 4 of the smaller missiles.
There's probably engineers smacking their heads going, you couldn't do that because of the thermal properties or whatever, but it is interesting.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you totally would. On the other hand, there are some lessons about geometry that would be applicable to other situations.
Have there ever been any triangle missile or other shaped missiles, guys? I know when you get up to the size of Tomahawk and stuff, it's not unusual to have them triangle shape. But
okay, so I can answer that question because the cylinder is going to present less variability when they're flying along. Like, say, with the missile does have angle of attack on it, for example. It pivots and it goes up, down, left, right, whatever. As long as it's round, those forces are going to be fairly predictable. They're going to be the same, whether you all of a sudden, go left or all of a sudden go to 2 o'clock or whatever. Your forces are going to be largely the same. However, if it's a triangular missile, and it's a triangular body tube on the missile, there's going to be some problems because depending on whether you have a face, whether it's what the angle of the face is, compared to the direction that you're turning, that's going to have a significant variable impact on your aerodynamics. On the other hand, I would imagine with a very intelligent missile, you could, 1, work around that, and 2, potentially use it to your advantage. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff I think about.
Okay, Tom, what I was thinking at this point, if we've heard lots of me talking to you, at this point I start to like to open it up to the guys because they ask abstract questions that I would never think of. Before we do that, do we have the little animations on here? Animation 1.
I don't sit around watching these things all day.
But
then every once in a while I stop and look at it and I go, damn, that looks really good.
We do. Did you make these animations yourself, by the way, Tom?
Yeah, so I work in Modo, which is similar to Maya or Cinema 4D. It's similar to that, but not entirely. And it's got a fairly decent rendering engine. You can rig everything up. But then what I did is I packaged it and sent it off to a company called Render Street. And it's awesome. It's just, as opposed to sitting there listening to your computer, huff and puff away for all damn day trying to knock out a render.
Welcome to my life, Tom. That's what I do.
Yeah. You package your file and it takes some practice, a couple days of busting files and crap results. but you figure out the process and send it off, and they provide updates, every 30 minutes or something about how it's going, and you see your baby being knitted together in the womb there, and then after a couple days, they send you your file back, and you're like, wow, this is the way to get it done.
Absolutely.
So my question would be, we know this is a concept, but when can we get model kits of this?
Model kits. Why not? Make some money out of it, Tom.
You want to know
Absolutely.
something that's ridiculous? That is actually the very first instance that thought has ever crossed my mind.
I would absolutely love to have a material version of this thing.
I don't know. Well, let's see. If you can come up with a business case, and if you can come up with a technical solution to that, then maybe we should explore that.
I should say, Grump, as well. I won't say much, obviously. I don't want to get Tom in trouble. But this will become more well known in the future. This design, but that's all. I won't say anything more than that. It's not going to be made into a plane or anything, obviously. But it's it'll become more famous. Put it that way.
Yeah,
You need to sell it to Disney.
Well, there you go.
Oh, absolutely not.
When I look at something like this, though, I start to worry slightly about things like cost, complexity,
Of course,
maintainability, and some of the things that we're seeing problems with the F-35, the F-22, which means at any point in time you don't get that many of these aircraft in the air. Have you thought about that when looking at the concept of a 6th gen fighter? To what extent does maintainability, cost, complexity come into the equation?
I guess you just threw that out, Tom. Did you just throw that out, or was that a consideration?
The short answer is for this, I threw it out. It wasn't a consideration. But, when it comes to other realistic programs that I have worked on, certainly cost and maintainability are primary drivers. That's the second thing I'm going to say. But the third one is that I think it is possible to create a concept design that is compelling, fun to look at, really cool, and clearly addresses both of those issues. If you can imagine, if I, had some other airplane or some other concept, those aren't boring grown-up things that we only need to be worried about when it comes to realistic aircraft. I think we can hit that head on with concept design, with the design that not only performs well, but would be very compelling to look at, and also obvious that the problems that are being addressed are cost and maintainability. And that doesn't mean you get a piece of crap. I think that can be part of a really cool concept design. So I have, in this case, not part of the Killswitch story, but and I'm sorry, I can't see anybody's names on here, but I've given a lot of thought to doing something exactly like that, guys, we can solve cost and sustainability, for lack of a better term, in sexy ways, and in a way that contribute to performance. So stand by for that.
Yeah, I guess I'm a bit of a Luddite, you see, because when I look and I see the cost of something like an F-22, and I think, well, for the cost of an F-22, I could probably buy myself somewhere between 50 and 70 Spitfires. Now, 50 to 70 Spitfires actually prove more effective than an F-22, and I've got a nasty suspicion they might.
Okay, so I mentioned I did spent several years as an innovation consultant, specifically talking about things that don't have anything about airplanes. So I understand disruptive technology and the introduction and adoption of different things like that. So when you have a low cost solution like that, but there's what's important about low cost solutions, and now this is me rolling in here, that it should still be providing an improved capability. I mean, I know you meant like Spitfire is kind of tongue in cheek, but an important aspect.
I didn't actually.
Is attritability. Like the primary aspect of the solution should not be that I'm going to grind up a bunch, because then you've retreated to attrition warfare, which is not. It's a good temporary fix, but it's never a long-term solution. So that big can of worms there. But I have the opportunity, to address those things through concept design, and I've been doing it, like I said, for several years as a consultant, and for the last 3 or 4 years in the aviation industry specifically. And it's been interesting and rewarding, but I have a desire to do so more. I want to say publicly, but not like revealing anything bad, but just expressing more of what's in my heart about what we could be accomplishing with technology. So yeah, and addressing things like cost and sustainability in really cool ways.
Roger. Artie, your Spitfire idea is not sustainable because it costs too much for a modern Air Force to sustain 70 pilots. You could do it in World War II, but you can't do that anymore. It costs too much.
Yeah, I quite agree with you. It's the pilots that are actually the limiting factor there.
And Tom, just a question I'm plucking from the text chat. We presume that in terms of, again, like we've talked about before, with the Killswitch, we presume aerodynamics and stealth weren't really a consideration, or not on an engineering level for this. They were taken into account a bit, but that's as far as it goes, right?
Oh yeah. Not to an engineering level, or like what I do is I'm addressing publicly available information on what are reliable techniques, like the faceted surfaces and the dog tooth edges and the little slits and things like that. So yeah, there's some consideration given to it, but I would definitely not say to an engineering level of detail.
Roger. Guys, I'm opening you up now to ask any questions you want of Tom on the Killswitch, or anything you want to chat about regarding 5th gen, 6th gen. Obviously, Tom's a professional. He knows what is allowed to say and what is not. So,
okay, if you look at when you separate the canards and everything, it transitions down to its maneuverable size. You have forward swept. Forward swept leading edges like that inherently create unstable flight.
Can I jump in quick? I think something to factor in with that as well is you got the Su-47 and the X-29 both had really small flight control surfaces. We're looking at something that's like closer to a large delta wing that's just being split off. I would just say that would be part of the consideration. But anyways, continue on.
Yeah, so yeah, it's certainly a valid question, but I've got a ton of excuses. And so, and the one of them is based on yours exactly. It's like the section of that wing of the overall aerodynamics of aircraft, which are forward swept like that, is actually visually and emotionally it's significant, but it's actually a very small percentage of the aircraft altogether. So I'll say that. And then the other excuse is that when it comes to forward swept wings, and just follow me here, the forward sweptness of them doesn't cause them to be unstable. In the case of the X-29 and the Su-37 or whatever I forget what that's called, the Berkut, in their case, the instability of the aircraft had more to do with the canards and the desire for an inherently unstable aircraft to perform in dogfighting. So the forward swept aspect of the wing almost isn't really what makes it unstable, except the wing twisting that can occur with forward swept wings makes it's sort of a trade-off. It's like it improves how a wing normally stalls. It improves that because you're not going to stall at the tips and then suddenly you're rolling. So that's good about the forward swept wings. But what's bad is that when the wing twists, it does so in a way that contributes to instability. So you need either follow me here, either a real heavy wing or a real stiff wing, or real short. And in the case of the Killswitch, that forward swept leading edge is really short. So it's a way, because it's so small and where it's located, it's a way of taking advantage of the aerodynamics of having a forward swept wing area without paying a lot of the penalties that you would with a wide span forward swept wing. But
I agree, because materials since this, the Bell X-29 and the 37, they've changed.
Yeah.
Aircraft design is what I do. Let's just put it that way.
Huh, nice.
Yeah.
So I have a bachelor's in aircraft engineering and aeronautics.
Oh yeah. And that's why I'm like, well, where I'm like, yes, you're right. But like I said, I got a ton of excuses that I'm aware of that. What have I done to mitigate it on the design? And that's my answer.
That's why I asked the question, to see where your thought process is going.
Roger, guys. I was just in the background looking at some of these Su-47 pictures. God, it's amazing. What a piece of kit. There are so many surfaces on it. Canards, there are the lurxes, or whatever they're called. There's the forward swept wing. There is the rear stabs, which I'm presuming are one piece. Tail fins. That's a lot of things to go wrong as well.
Yeah.
Vectored thrust. It was a concept aircraft.
It was concept, wasn't it? But it flew.
Yeah. Technology demonstrator as well. But I think a lot of that was, though, they wanted to make an inherently aerodynamically unstable aircraft. That way they could use it to their advantage. And the limiting factor, or the thing that would limit that to where we could control it, is obviously fly-by-wire technology, more advanced avionics, that kind of stuff, to use it to their advantage and be able to pull off more, well, as the Russians like to do, high angle of attack dogfighting.
Whereas the Americans just built the AIM-9X. They don't have to dogfight anymore.
Yep, just hob everything.
Yeah.
Swept wing designs have all suffered from longevity problems. Just
Why?
Big moving parts that handle a lot of G's. I look at this design concept, the weight that you are moving around when it goes from this open wing to a closed wing. I cannot see this being a 9G aircraft that even has like a 4,000 hour flight life.
Well, the movement.
I just don't see the materials sustaining that type of twisting and torquing with those kind of weights, because there's no like real fulcrum. There's no like a centerpiece that's like holding everything together.
So a normal plane has a big longitudinal stringer known as the fuselage, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Which gives you a lot of strength. But I guess this sort of does or doesn't have that stringer. I'm not sure. I can't really picture it.
Yeah. So the guy who was bringing up that point is 100% correct. Like, okay, you're going to have major problems and I'm getting to my excuses. You're right. It's like with something with that kind of macro variable geometry, you would have problems with obviously your being able to transfer those loads and everything. Oh yeah. Leave it right here on this picture. So, so the way that I addressed that was, okay, if I'm going to have macro variable geometry like that, it has to be simple. Meaning, of course, maybe the wrong person use the word simple, but meaning it can't be like, rotating and sliding, or pieces moving out of the way, or this flap opens and this thing moves out of the way. None of that exists. It's basically there's one central core to the airplane, and you can see it in this. It's, from the nose all the way to the back. That's basically one piece. And then the two engine pieces, there's a left engine part and a right engine part. Those slide diagonally down and back. It's one motion. And check this out. It's like 14 inches. That's it. It's like, I mean, I forget exactly what the number is, but that entire back component, it seems like there's a lot going on, but it's just one sliding motion. Like I said, I forget maybe it's 20 inches or something like that, but it's like just was one section. It slides 20 inches. And that sliding, by the way, is accomplished with, it has two in that middle section, just ahead of the shot locker where the missiles are, and just behind the shot locker where the missiles are, and aligned with the main structural members of the engine. There's these two rotating cams, and they basically accomplish that sliding motion. obviously there's some weight that would go along with that. And like I said before, I made my excuses on weight. But yeah, he's right about the issue 100%. And so my solution is, how do I solve this with geometry? And that is, I don't want a bunch of shit moving in and out and flaps and rotating to have that transition happen. I get one sliding motion of not even 2 feet. That's all I get. And with that motion, I get, I get the split wing. I get the variable inlet. Yeah, I guess those are the two main things. But yeah, he's 100% right about the consideration, and that's how I solved it. What's the simplest motion I can do, and how much can I get out of that crap? And do I have the volume and geometry to accomplish that? Let alone weight. I mean, weight is the one where I kind of drop off, and I'm like, I don't know. But yeah, from a structural standpoint and a geometric standpoint, I've done my best to address it.
To look at, just coming back on your point, Simba, if we go to an F-14 Tomcat, which I think is a 9G aircraft, you've got a huge moving surfaces there. Those wings pivot all the way around and all the way back, and they're moving, and they're giving a good life cycle, aren't they, Simba?
Yes, but those wings don't bear 10,000 plus pound engines either. Those have longerons that transition the force. The wing root is what holds the bombs and the missiles. Almost all variable geometry. The only ones that don't, that I can think of off the top of my head, is the Tornado, and that's just got wing tanks that sit out on it.
But my understanding of the basic dynamics of this is that you have a pivot point somewhere. Everything's got a pivot point somewhere. The further you get away from that pivot point, that's where your stresses are coming in. So if you've got something that's miles away from the pivot point, like the end of this wing, that's going to give a large stress on that wing box. But in this fictitious design, you don't have that big lever to worry about. I don't know. Maybe Al's got a different thinking of that, but I don't see any huge lever forces on it.
What you do have is you have 40,000 pounds of thrust per engine pushing in one direction, and you go to pull G's, you're going to have weight and gravity multiplying that 10,000 pound engine trying to go in the other direction. So you're going to have stresses both trying to push and pull, and on a pivot point, because those are very substantial parts of the aircraft. I know he said he didn't quite go into the full engineering aspect of it, but I mean, you're going to have fuel lines, oil lines, all types of things. They're going to have to move and pivot with all of that.
Wow,
my bigger thing is, like, you're talking about 12,000 pound engine. Now multiply that by 9 in a compounding turn. Like, that's that. Like I said, I can see it could do it, but what's the sustainability? Because
that's an engineering problem. But if you could actually build it almost as a independent module, you could almost self-contain a lot of that from an engineering standpoint.
So you could almost have an electric link then to the self-contained engine module, and then the lever.
That's the engineering problem.
Interesting.
It's feasible, is all I'm saying.
I'm just talking about longevity, because I mean, you look at like your 4th gen planes that came out. These things are starting to hit 50-year marks, projected out to 60-year life cycles. One of the problems with the B1 is it's getting older. It's like the swept wing of that size is getting harder to maintain. The F-14 became just expensive to try to maintain its sweep wing design. So something like this, that's what I'm saying. Like, structurally, yeah, I'm sure you could do it. I'm sure it could do 2,000 combat hours. But when we're looking for airplanes that are going to do 7, 8, 9,000 combat hours, which translates to 30, 40 years of life cycle.
I agree with Simba 100%. And I work with some very creative and skilled stress engineers on real stuff. So I'm able to go out and do this with a little less shame. But yeah, he's 100% correct. And so for me, it's, how do I at least do my best with some geometry instead of having some, big giant cantilevered thing or, item, sticking out without addressing even the geometry of the stress. But it's also a challenge, right? It's like, how does my next airplane look that, has geometry, and yet at the same time can address the issues that he is talking about? Can I solve that with geometry? And can I make that obvious and attractive to people? And the answer is, well, if I'm a good designer, I can. If I'm not, then maybe I can't. But yeah, those are important considerations and criteria, even for concept design.
At this point, I'll sign the video off. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you later.